They believed I was just some fat cat rancher they could intimidate into compliance. How cute. When they burned down my century-old barn over a stupid membership disagreement, they had no idea that the reserve fellow in the land management office actually makes every land grant decision in the whole state. Oops. They smugly believed their darling rulebook might shut me up. Isn't that cute? Meanwhile, I've been quietly plotting the legal version of a nuclear bomb, forging alliances with those who actually count while they were occupied taking measurements of my grass length with rulers. Now, not only am I taking back my property, I'm going to teach them a masterclass in what actually constitutes power. Drop a remark on the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever come across, because I promise what these clipboard warriors don't know about me is about to destroy their neatly trimmed world. Get your popcorn, people. This revenge tale gets tasty ugly. I never aspired to be a rancher. I spent summers as a kid at my grandfather's place outside Boulder, Colorado. But my journey took me to a desk job in the county's land management division. I was happy with my peaceful life until last spring, when a telephone call from a lawyer turned my life upside down. William, your grandfather left you the Hayes Ranch, all 15 acres, the house, the barn, everything my grandfather, Harold Hayes, had left me. His inheritance, a 100-year-old ranch that had been in our family for 4 generations, with the Holy Spring, a natural source of water that Native people had once thought to be healing grounds. The place was lovely rolling pasturage with mountain vistas, a solid farmhouse, and a stunning timber barn, which my great-grandfather had constructed with his own hands. What I didn't know was that my grandfather's ranch was an island of rural peace in the middle of the fast-developing Golden Meadows development, an exclusive gated community with an old grievance against my family. The initial inkling of danger came 3 days after the move. A cream-colored letterhead with embossed writing, "Welcome to the Golden Meadows community enclosed," was a letter stating that as a result of recent boundary changes, my land now fell under their jurisdiction. The following day, a black SUV bearing the logo of Golden Meadows pulled up my driveway. A late 30s woman emerged, designer sunglasses balanced on her head. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Elizabeth Montgomery, president of the Golden Meadows Homeowners Association." Her smile lacked eye contact as she scanned my grandfather's weathered farmhouse. "There seems to be some misunderstanding," I said, crossing my arms. "This property is not part of Golden Meadows, never has been." Elizabeth's smile tightened. "Actually, the county sanctioned a boundary redrawing 5 years ago. Your grandfather was not with to give it any recognition, but we hoped that with new ownership, we could begin anew." The name Montgomery resonated. My grandfather had written about the Montgomerys in his journals, a family who had attempted to purchase his land for decades, ever since Elizabeth's father had lost a water rights lawsuit in the 1970s that almost ruined him. I spent that night rummaging through my grandfather's papers. Between property tax returns and water rights agreements, I discovered a folder marked Boundary Dispute. Within was letters to county authorities specifically exempting his land from inclusion in any developments around it. Another folder had decades of lawsuits with the Montgomery family, including efforts to deflect the Holy Spring that supplied both our land. My neighbor George Wilson, a 74-year-old retired city planner, came by the following day with a basket of vegetables. "Watch out for that HOA group. Your grandfather was the only one who pushed back against them. Rest of us got gobbled up years ago." My wife Linda's rose bushes weren't the accepted type, made her rip out 30-year-old family heirlooms. His horror was palpable. "The Montgomerys have had a grudge against this property ever since your grandfather wouldn't sell the spring rights to Elizabeth's father. Now she controls that HOA like some sort of personal thief." 3 days later, I woke up to the hum of machinery at the border of my property. A small landscaping team was taking down portions of my grandfather's split-rail fence. I burst out in my pajamas. "What do you think you're doing?" The foreman of the crew looked uncomfortable. "HOA directives. Sir, this fence is not up to community standards." That afternoon, Elizabeth Montgomery returned, this time accompanied by Gregory Phillips, the HOA's development liaison. "Mr. Hayes," Elizabeth started, her tone professionally sympathetic, "we know this change may be tough for you. Your grandfather was a holdout from progress, but Golden Meadows has plans for this land that will benefit all of you. Gregory nodded fervently. The recreation facility we're developing will be of the latest design, all just a stone's throw away from your doorstep. Your property values would triple. This house is not for sale, I said assertively, and it's not within your HOA. Then I began to protest. Gregory cleared his throat. There's also the issue of compliance issues. Your tractor is in plain view from the main road. Your mailbox is not up to community standards. And quite frankly, the barn is an eyesore as per our architectural guidelines. My blood started boiling. That eyesore was constructed by my great-grandfather in 1922. It's been standing a hell of a whole lot longer than your development. They left a 3-ring binder of regulations on my porch swing. That night my phone called. It was Jerry Hoffman, my grandfather's old buddy in the county records office. William, someone's been asking for all the historical paperwork connected to your property borders. And there's something else. There are some differences between our online records and our paper files. I believe someone might have tampered with the computer boundary maps. I gazed out at the barn outlined by the desert sun. Next to it loomed the ancient tree that framed the sacred spring, the real heart of the property, and I guessed Elizabeth Montgomery's true quarry all along. The pile of violation notices started coming in on a daily basis. Bright yellow papers detailing how my property failed to meet Golden Meadow standards, excessive lawn height, non-conforming vehicle storage, agricultural equipment visible from the road. The fines started at $50 each, but escalated with every day of non-compliance. Meanwhile, Abigail from the Land Management Office called with troubling news. William, I've been digging into those boundary changes. Something's not right. Official records indicate your property was added to their zone of development 5 years back, but I am unable to locate any notice to your grandfather or public hearing records which would have been mandatory on them. I was not surprised. My grandfather maintained every record in detail. He possessed letters in particular, exempting his property. Abigail's voice dropped to a whisper. Those exemption papers aren't in our database. It's as if they've been wiped clean. One Tuesday morning, I came home from a supply run to discover a crew of workers in Golden Meadows uniforms excavating along my east property boundary. A big drainage pipe was being laid, cutting straight through what had long been my grandfather's property. I called out the crew supervisor, who scarcely looked at me. HOA permission, he mentioned, showing a document we're installing mandated drainage upgrades. The document referenced an arcane county planning code regarding parcels with watershed management responsibility. By afternoon hours, they had installed a 6-foot-wide ditch that effectively barred access to my rear pasture. When I phoned the HOA office, I was advised to contact Gregory Phillips. Mr. Hayes, he added with seasoned patience. All Golden Meadows owners need to be a part of our watershed system. You'll be getting a $5,000 assessment for your portion of the environmental impact fees. The following day, an official sounding notice appeared by certified mail outlining the HOA's emergency powers over environmental concerns. At the bottom was a letter that made my stomach turn. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will activate a property lien and potential foreclosure proceedings. George Wilson became an unlikely friend, bringing me coffee every morning and updating me on the HOA's history. Elizabeth took over 3 years ago, he explained as we sat beside the sacred spring. Her family's been crazy about this property since your grandfather won that case over the water rights in '73. Her father said the spring should have remained common ground, but he actually just wanted to sell and bottle up the water. Your grandfather established that the spring was part of Hayes land since the 1880s and also held cultural values to the area's indigenous inhabitants. Linda, George's wife, had secretly taped HOA meetings. They've been after your property directly, she confided, listening to a recording in which Elizabeth had spoken of strategic purchasing of the Hayes blight and ultimately owning that damn spring. The worst part of it was hearing Mayor Harold Bennett's voice volunteering to speed along any paperwork that might be required. One morning I found my secondary access road was blocked by concrete barriers, a sign announcing it. Golden Meadows Construction Zone, no trespassing. This effectively forced me to use only my main driveway, which they monitored constantly. My research into Golden Meadows intensified. Using my knowledge of land management protocols, I requested copies of their original development permits. The HOA had been built on former agricultural land, resown through a special county variance. Such variances typically came with conditions, usually environmental protections or public access requirements. While at the county offices, I bumped into Councilman Benjamin Foster, a 61-year-old environmental activist I'd worked on an issue with before. "William, heard you're having issues with Golden Meadows." No surprise, they've been dodging environmental rules for years. That entire development was constructed on protected wetlands. The only reason it passed was some shady pull on the zoning board. As we spoke, I saw Elizabeth's husband come into the mayor's office across the hall, thick envelope in hand. Coming home that afternoon, I got an emergency alert on my phone. The security system I'd put in indicated a number of official vehicles, with county license plates coming down my driveway, and a truck pulling construction equipment. I called Sheriff Daniel Warren as I was driving home. "Someone's on my property without my permission," explained in haste. "They have machinery." By the time I skidded into my driveway, 20 minutes later, a crew of workers in county uniforms was removing my historic front gate. Another group was installing equipment close to my barn. A third had started putting up Golden Meadows Community Recreation zone signs along my fence line. What they were doing made me most worried was that they were placing equipment close to the Sacred Springs oak tree, the centuries-old monument my grandfather fought so desperately to safeguard. Gregory Phillips stood over clipboard in hand, a self-satisfied grin on his face. "Hey, Mr. Hayes, impeccable timing. We're installing the county-sanctioned safety upgrades to your non-compliant buildings. I have all my permits right here." My hand trembled with fury as I grabbed the documents from Gregory's hand. The permits looked genuine enough to start Look County letterhead, official seals, even the planning commissioner's signature. But listed as owner was Golden Meadows Community Trust. "Fraudulent," I exclaimed, my voice surer than I felt. "This house is owned by William Hayes. You have no right to be here." Gregory's grin never faltered. "In fact, because you neglected to obey watershed management codes, the county has bestowed emergency remediation authority. It's all legal as it should be." He waved to the workers who kept taking apart my gate in spite of my objections. I stood in front of a bulldozer making its way toward my barn in the Holy Spring Oak. "Stop immediately or I'm calling the sheriff." The driver looked hesitantly at Gregory, who nodded curtly. "The sheriff's office have been informed of our actions today. Shift your gear around, Mr. Hayes. We have a schedule to keep." I took out my phone and began recording, documenting everything. The workers, the gear. Gregory's smug face, the permits. One of the workers walked up to the electrical panel on the side of the barn, ready to shut off the power. "Don't touch that," I told him. "It's hooked into the main house wiring." The worker glanced over at Gregory, who once more nodded permission. As the worker started to unscrew the electrical panel, a shower of sparks explosively burst forth. He leapt back, losing his tools. Then someone yelled, "Fire!" A small flame had ignited in the dry straw close to the barn's foundation. In moments it had propagated to the creaky wood. I dashed off to the garden hose, yelling at someone to call the fire department. Gregory retreated slowly, face blanched, ordering into his cell phone. The crew members ran for cover in confusion, others grabbing fire extinguishers out of their vans, others just deserting the property. By the time the fire trucks rolled in, the barn had been completely enveloped in fire. I stood idle with George and Linda Wilson standing by as firefighters fought the fire. Inside the barn were irreplaceable family heirlooms, my great-grandfather's tools, my grandmother's hope chest photos and letters 100 years old. And worse than that, the ceremonial objects of the local native tribe that my grandfather had vowed to safeguard, kept in the safe conditions of the barnstone root cellar. Sheriff Daniel Warren came as the roof fell in a blaze of embers. "Jesus, William, what happened here?" I told him about the unauthorized work crew in the electrical panel. When Gregory tried to sneak away to his car, Sheriff Warren came up behind him. "Not so fast, Mr. Phillips. I need a statement from everyone present." Gregory smoothed out his tie nervously. "This was obviously an accident during duly authorized county maintenance. We have all the proper papers." Fire Chief Samuel Carter appeared as the final flames were being smothered. "I'm sorry, William. We did the best we could." He spoke in a lower tone. Between you and me, this doesn't appear like an ordinary accident. The fire burned too fast, and that electrical panel wouldn't let it spark like that, unless someone had tampered with it. I'm going to do a full investigation. Elizabeth Montgomery's black SUV pulled up as the emergency cars started to leave. She stepped out looking suitably concerned in a flawless tailored suit. "Mr. Hayes, what a horrible tragedy," I came as soon as I heard. Her sympathy was for real, practiced. "Of course, if your property was taken care of to our standards of safety, this may have been averted." The temerity left me speechless. She went on in a smooth stream. "Perhaps now you'll change your mind about our proposal. Golden Meadows would be delighted to relieve you of this problematic property." In that moment, something snapped within me. The sorrow at losing my grandfather's barn gave way to cold, clear fury. "Leave my property, Elizabeth, now, and take your offer with you." Her face hardened. "You may want to rethink your attitude, Mr. Hayes. The county inspector will be assessing this property tomorrow. Considering the glaring safety risks now on site, I wouldn't be surprised if they issued a condemnation order the following week went by in a blur of insurance adjusters, fire investigators, and piling up HOA infractions. I attempted to file complaints with the county only to discover that Elizabeth's husband chaired the appeals board. My spirits hit rock bottom when a certified letter arrived declaring my property abandoned and hazardous, following the fire triggering an expedited condemnation process. I sat on my porch that evening, surrounded by violation notices and legal threats, wondering if it was even worth fighting anymore. The sun was setting over the mountains, casting long shadows over the burnt beam of the barn. Something was troubling me. A glint of metal in the ashes, I investigated and discovered my grandfather's old fireproof lockbox, half melted but unopened. Inside were property deeds, water rights papers, and a little brass key marked First National Bank Box, 623. The following morning, I went into the bank downtown. The safe deposit box held additional of my grandfather's documents, such as detailed records of his contribution to the county's land grant system many years ago when he was a young man working in the planning department. Most importantly, it contained records of the original conditional land grants for what had become Golden Meadows. The development occupied land needing special environmental safeguards and, importantly, renewal of its conditional usage allow every 20 years. To my grandfather's diligent records, that renewal was coming due exactly 30 days from then. But what surprised me most was an old picture of my grandfather standing proudly in front of the hallowed spring oak with a handwritten inscription on the reverse side. "Remember, William, they may burn our buildings, but the land knows who its rightful stewards are." The truth hit me like a bolt of lightning. For 15 years, I'd been employed by the Land Management Department, processing forms, granting permits, and running the very same system my grandfather had assisted in setting up. I'd never equated my administrative position with real power until today. Those conditional grants of land were legal documents that had to be reviewed and renewed from time to time. Review that would pass across my department's desk. Taking a day off work, I drove down to the county office and sought access to the historic land grant records. The archives in the basement were a maze of filing cabinets filled with land history for the county. After digging through them for hours, I came across what I was looking for: the original 1998 Golden Meadows development permits. The terms were clear: 20% of the land would have to remain empty. Wetlands, public access, trails had to be maintained, and native plant species conserved. Most importantly, the conditional grant had to be renewed every 20 years, with evidence of continued compliance with all the original conditions. In accordance with the renewal timetable, Golden Meadows review should have reached my desk in just 27 days. If they could not show compliance with the original conditions, their land grant could be taken away or altered with new restrictions. For the first time since taking over my grandfather's property, I felt a glimmer of hope. I called Abigail Taylor. "I need all you can dig up on Golden Meadows, environmental compliance history." I described inspection reports, violation notices, anything. Abigail was curious. "This wouldn't have anything to do with your barn burning down mysteriously, would it?" When I didn't answer right away, she went on, "I'll see what I can excavate. And watch out for William. These individuals have ties." Her warning came in time. When I reported to work the following day, my boss, Director Gwen Howard, summoned me to her office. "William, I got a disturbing call from the mayor's office." She started examining me over her reading glasses. Apparently, there's some issue of conflict of interest between your land and the Golden Meadows development. I clarified the circumstances, the boundary conflict, the harassment, the damage to my barn, and the attack on the sacred spring oak, which carried cultural value to local native communities. Gwen listened carefully, her expression becoming increasingly worried. "This is exactly why nepotism rules exist," she sighed. "But in your situation, given that the property was newly inherited and the disagreement wasn't pre-existing at the time of employment," she tapped her pen reflectively, "legally, I can't remove you from processing their renewal application unless there's a formal complaint with evidence of bias. Has there been?" "Not yet," I admitted, "but Elizabeth Montgomery has connections to the mayor. It's probably coming." Gwen's eyes narrowed. "Until then, you proceed as normal, but William document everything, every interaction, every shred of evidence. If this turns ugly, you'll need it." That day, I was served notice that my property was to be inspected by the county health department for anonymous complaints. At the same time, an email from Abigail came with reports on Golden Meadows. Her research indicated a trend of environmental infractions. Wetlands filled in for more housing, protected tree species, eliminated toxic runoff into the watershed from their golf course. Most incriminating was proof that 7 HOA board members, including Elizabeth Montgomery, had constructed unauthorized additions to their residences without conducting adequate environmental impact analyses. If they came in for renewal without correcting these infractions, I would have good cause to recommend denial. When I arrived back at home that evening, I discovered Golden Meadows security cars parked down my driveway along my fence line, taking pictures. One of the men stopped as I pulled into my drive. Mr. Hayes were conducting safety hazards for tomorrow's health inspection. He was professional sounding, but there was a gleam in his smile. "And any hazards you see were caused when your men torched my barn," I said icily. I decided to do something that night that I knew the HOA had installed monitoring devices in the drainage pipes on my property. Rather than taking them out, I would turn the tables on them. I bought miniature wireless cameras of my own and installed them very carefully, inside the same access panels where I had discovered their equipment. Now I could keep tabs on who checked the surveillance gear and what they did with it. It was a dangerous thing to do, but I had to get as much evidence as possible before the confrontation I knew was inevitable. The following day, while the county health inspector was inspecting my land, I saw Gregory Phillips and a man I didn't know inspecting drainage pipes along my property line. My secret cameras caught them taking memory cards out of their monitoring equipment and talking about what seemed to be their next move. "Elizabeth wants him gone prior to the renewal date," Gregory said firmly. "We've got the condemnation hearing in 2 weeks that should take care of it." The second man, whom I later recognized as Anthony Turner, a retired police officer who was now Golden Meadows chief of security, seemed uneasy. "This is getting beyond me, Greg. The barn was something, but if someone discovers those tracking gadgets, we might be facing severe charges." During the course of the next week, I started a systematic campaign of documentation. Using satellite photographs from the Land Use Office, I marked down places where Golden Meadows had invaded covered wetlands. I took photos of non-native landscaping that disobeyed their initial agreement. I compiled 7 instances of runoff contamination from their golf course. In the meantime, I sat down with Councilman Benjamin Foster to discuss my report concerning Golden Meadows' environmental transgressions. As one of the only local politicians not in Elizabeth Montgomery's back pocket, he was a good friend. "This is worse than I realized," he stated, reading over my documentation. "They've essentially disregarded every stipulation of their initial grant, particularly the need to maintain the native cultural sites. That holy spring on your land, it's specifically referred to in their original contract as a cultural site to be preserved that they are to assist in maintaining access to for tribal ritual." The next day brought a further escalation. I was notified my property had been listed as abandoned, following the fire instigating an accelerated condemnation process. The hearing was to be held in 2 weeks' time. Conveniently, just prior to Golden Meadows land, grant renewal came up that night as I was making updates on my records. George Wilson knocked loudly on my door. "William, you have to see this." He took me to his boundary line overlooking a part of Golden Meadows. In the distance, Elizabeth Montgomery was taking a group of investors on a tour of what seemed to be a building site. "They're breaking ground on that recreation center," George explained somberly, "on protected land they don't have legal control over." I documented everything, catching Elizabeth selling the project as a done deal. The following morning, I got an urgent call from Abigail Taylor. "William, you have to come down here now. I discovered something you won't believe." When I went to the county office, she introduced me to maps of properties and messages she had retrieved from the system archives, demonstrating how Elizabeth and Gregory had fiddled with flood zone maps to single out my property. "They've been hatching this for years," Abigail related, her voice taut with fury. "They manufactured a phony watershed issue to warrant asserting jurisdiction over your land. With proof of fraud and environmental misconduct in hand, I required a methodical strategy. Elizabeth had too many connections in municipal government for a frontal attack. Rather, I would develop a case, cautiously collect allies, and strike when the moment was right. First, I contacted Heather Jackson, an investigative reporter who worked for the regional newspaper. Unlike the local paper, her paper wasn't reliant on real estate advertising. I couldn't make any promises, she warned when we met in a coffee shop beyond town. But if your evidence is good, this could be a significant news. I distributed copies of the modified boundary maps and emails with pictures of environmental abuses. Heather's eyes opened wide as she perused the papers. This is way beyond HOA overreach. This is organized fraud and corruption. She promised to start investigating on the spot, threatening to hold publication until we had the whole story. Next, I spoke with retired Judge Albert Graham, a Golden Meadows resident known for his integrity. At 78, he had lost none of his sharp intellect. "I moved here for peace and quiet in my retirement," he explained as we sat in his study. "Instead, I found myself living under a petty dictatorship." As he examined the documentation I'd gathered, his judicial demeanor cracked slightly. "This is outrageous. They've been manipulating county records, violating environmental protections, and apparently demonstrating their goals through the destruction of private property." The judge put on his glasses slowly. "Mr. Hayes, what you have here is grounds for civil action at least, and possibly for criminal charges. How can I assist?" His support was a turning point. As a respected retired judge, his voice would carry authority with county officials who might otherwise ignore my claims. "I need to form an alliance," I explained. "Individuals who would rise up when the time arrives." The judge nodded in consideration. "I think I can help with that. A number of residents here are more and more troubled by the HOA's tactics. We simply needed proof and guidance." Meanwhile, I continued to document Golden Meadows infractions while feigning cooperation with their mounting harassment. At work, I kept my professional composure while gearing up for their land grant renewal. Director Howard let me know about behind-the-scenes pressure from the mayor's office. "They're pushing for your recusal," she confided. "Up to now, I've managed to hold them off, but they're taking it up to the county commissioner. I keep an eye on my hidden cameras every day, gathering footage of Gregory and Anthony making frequent trips to their surveillance equipment. Most importantly, I caught Elizabeth herself directing them to make sure Hayes is under constant surveillance." This was a clear privacy violation that would add weight to my case. What surprised me most was when Anthony Turner lingered after one such visit, looking troubled. He pulled out his phone and took photographs of the drainage system, shaking his head. "This isn't right," I heard him mutter. I made a mental note. Anthony may be having second thoughts about his part in this scam. As the renewal date neared, I had an unexpected guest at my office, Natalie Phillips, Gregory's wife. She was nervous, looking over her shoulder as she came in. "Mr. Hayes, I don't have much time. Gregory can't discover I'm here." She put a USB drive on my desk. "These are internal HOA emails and meeting notes of the past 3 years. I didn't know what they were doing until recently, when they burned down your barn." She stumbled. "That was intentional, wasn't it?" I nodded slowly. "We think so, though it's been hard to prove it." Natalie squared her shoulders. "Well, these may help. There's talk of cutting down the obstacles on your land plans for pushing you out. Elizabeth even teases about how handy a fire would be." I looked at the little drive, possibly holding the proof I required to establish arson. "Why are you doing this?" I questioned. Natalie's face hardened. "They ransacked my garden last month, Roses I'd been cultivating for 20 years, non-conforming plant varieties, they said. But the actual reason I complained when they felled the old oak near the community center, yet another holy native site they were to preserve. My daughter is half Native American on my first husband's side, and that tree held significance for her heritage. The hearing for condemning my property was on the next Monday, only 3 days prior to Golden Meadows land grant. Extension would cross my desk. On the weekend, I spent hours carefully preparing with my brother Philip's legal advice, arranging all my evidence. On Sunday night, the developers of the Recreation Center project, Hudson and Brooks, made a $20 million investment in Golden Meadows' community enhancement initiative. The timing was not accidental. They were trying to generate momentum and political pressure before both hearings. That night, I received a text message from an unknown number security office south on tomorrow 8 a.m. It was mysterious, but I thought it could be from Anthony Turner. The following morning, I drove by the Golden Meadows security office. At the scheduled time, Anthony Turner stood outside mousing around as though he were checking something on his car. As I drove by, he slipped one of them underneath his windshield wiper. I came back a few minutes later and picked it up after he'd entered inside. The envelope held printed emails between Elizabeth and Gregory about how the electrical panel had been set up prior to the work crew arriving at my barn, along with a handwritten note. My nephew attended the Sacred Spring ceremony last year. This has gone too far. Monday morning came with dark clouds looming to rain, weather to fit the hearing of condemnation. I went to the county building and found Elizabeth Montgomery and Mayor Bennett standing in huddle outside the hearing room. They stilled as I approached Elizabeth with a thin smile. "Mr. Hayes, I hope this ordeal isn't too strenuous for you. Sometimes releasing is the healthier choice." I replied to her in sincere sympathy with mine. "I do appreciate your concern, Elizabeth. I've done a lot of research recently into property lines, environmental regulations, surveillance statutes, interesting topics." Something flickered in her eyes, the first glimmer of doubt I'd seen. The hearing room was filled hearing board members, local officials, and numerous Golden Meadows residents. I didn't know Judge Graham nodded slightly from the back row. When it was my time to respond to the condemnation offer, I went up to podium calmly. "Board members, I think this hearing has nothing to do with safety, but is a systematic effort to take control of my property by fraudulent means." A whisper went around the room. I put a pile of documents on the table. I have proof that Golden Meadows HOA has been involved in boundary manipulation, environmental violations, and possibly criminal activity, including destruction of property and illegal surveillance. Elizabeth's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. Mr. Hayes is obviously bitter about losing his unsafe buildings and is striking back with unfounded accusations." County Commissioner Allison Wright, who had remained quiet up to now, leaned forward. "Are you saying, Miss Montgomery, that the satellite photos of wetland loss, the change boundary documents, and the surveillance equipment are all fakes?" Elizabeth blinked in shock. "What surveillance equipment?" I pulled out photographs of the devices discovered in the drainage pipes placed on my land without permission and intended to track my behavior. A blatant breach of privacy statutes. The commissioner addressed the county attorney. "I think we should put this condemnation proceeding on hold, pending investigation of these claims." Mayor Bennett started objecting, but Commissioner Wright interrupted him. "In addition, I'm calling for a complete investigation of all Golden Meadows permits and compliance record prior to renewal applications being dealt with." Elizabeth's face had paled. As the hearing was adjourned, she rushed out already to her ear. The first battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The headline of Wednesday's regional newspaper read, "Development Fraud, WHO Accused of Document Falsification, Environmental Crimes." Heather Jackson's investigative article set out the evidence methodically, altered boundary maps, filled wetlands, surveillance activities, and suspicious events around my barn fire. By mid-morning, local TV crews were parked outside the Golden Meadows entrance, asking statements from Elizabeth Montgomery and the HOA board across town at a county commission emergency meeting. The Golden Meadows land grant renewal application was formally put on hold pending investigation. I sat quietly in the back of the chamber as Commissioner Wright said there would be a thorough review of all development permits granted during Mayor Bennett's term. The mayor himself was noticeably absent, having called in sick that morning. Gregory Phillips tried to speak for the HOA's interests, but seemed nervous and unprepared. These charges are entirely unfounded, he maintained without enthusiasm. Golden Meadows has always been in complete compliance with county ordinances. Commissioner Wright was not impressed. Mr. Phillips, we have satellite photos of preserved wetlands that were filled for your golf course expansion. Would you like to tell me how that is full compliance? Gregory pulled at his collar. I would have to review our environmental impact reports. The same reports the commissioner went on that seemed to have been changed after approval. Those reports the commission chamber had filled with Golden Meadows residents. Many hearing these claims for the first time, murmurs of displeasure ran through the crowd. Judge Graham rose to speak to the commission as a Golden Meadows resident and retired county judge. I call for a complete audit of HOA accounts. Many of us have contributed significant special assessments for environmental regulation that now seem questionable at best. His words brought a chorus of assent from other residents. The commission voted unanimously to widen their research to encompass HOA fiscal habits. Outside the chamber, I was visited by Hudson and Brooks representatives, the builders who had made the $20 million recreation center investment. Mr. Hayes, the elder partner, started hesitantly. In view of recent news, we're reconsidering our stance regarding the Golden Meadows expansion. I nodded, assent likely prudent. The land grant renewal will not likely move forward without significant changes and fines. He looked around nervously. We were reassured that all permits were correct and environmental issues resolved. Our business has a sustainability obligation that seems to have been sacrificed. I felt there was an opportunity. There are means to grow responsibly. My grandfather was in favor of equilibrated development that maintained natural resources. The developers shared glances. Maybe we should talk over different methods that would meet the needs of both environmental protections and community needs. This was a surprise introduction, potential supporters from what had been the opposition ranks. That afternoon, Sheriff Warren asked me to visit his office. When I got there, Fire Chief Carter was sitting with him, as well as a county arson investigator. William, the sheriff started, we've finished our investigation of the barn fire. He slid a folder across his desk. According to witness accounts, physical evidence, and some new video footage we acquired recently, we concluded the fire was caused by willful negligence during unauthorized work on your property. My heart racing. Do you have enough to charge them with? The fire chief nodded grimly. We've got something better than our conclusion. He opened a laptop and played a video security footage from Linda Wilson's garden camera, which took a clear picture of my home. In the footage, Elizabeth Montgomery and Gregory Phillips were seen ordering laborers to take fire suppression gear away from around the barn prior to the accident. Elizabeth was easily heard. Make certain there is nothing preventing a spark from igniting. An old construction like that is begging for an electrical accident. The proof was incriminating. Sheriff Warren closed the laptop. We're charging them criminally with destruction of property fraud and reckless endangerment. We've already spoken to Miss Montgomery and Mr. Phillips to make arrangements for their passports to be surrendered. I leaned back, feelings raging. After months of being powerless against their manipulations, justice was at last at hand. What next? Sheriff Warren's expression was professional but satis. Now we follow the evidence wherever it leads. The surveillance equipment, the document falsification, the financial irregularities. This is beyond HOA overreach into criminal conspiracy. Mayor Bennett has already been served with a subpoena for his communications with Golden Meadows leadership. As I left the sheriff's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Abigail. Turn on Channel 12. Now I discovered a coffee shop with a TV just in time to catch Elizabeth Montgomery being led from the Golden Meadows clubhouse by sheriff's deputies, her face a combination of shock and anger. Gregory Phillips trailed head down, evading the camera. The next day, I delivered my research on Golden Meadows environmental infractions to the Land Management Department. Director Howard had made arrangements for environmental specialists, county legal counsel, and Commissioner Wright to be present. My presentation was exhaustive satellite photography demonstrating wetland loss, water quality reports showing contaminant, leaching wildlife impact studies displaying habitat destruction, and documentation of removal of protected species. Based on these observations, I concluded I recommend denial of Golden Meadows land grant renewal until all infractions are corrected and a comprehensive environmental restoration plan is put into action. The room fell silent as my colleagues digested the evidence. Mr. Wright eventually spoke. This is the most thorough record of environmental breaches I've witnessed in 20 years of public service. Mr. Hayes, regardless of personal attacks and the vandalism of your property, you've held professional standards throughout this process. The county owes you a debt of gratitude and an apology. That night, a convoy of cars drove up my driveway. Golden Meadows neighbors headed by Judge Graham and the Wilsons. For an instant, I braced myself to see if this was another showdown. Instead, they arrived with food and refreshments and an offer. "We're creating a new homeowners association," Judge Graham said, as residents organize an impromptu picnic nearby. "The site of my barn owns that values property rights, environmental safeguards, and community input. We'd appreciate your advice on how to frame it correctly." Linda Wilson contributed, "Those of us who've lived here the longest remember when all this was farmland. Your grandfather was justified in defending his chunk of it. We should have battled more strenuously for ours. With the sun setting behind the mountains, stretching out long shadows over my neighbors' properties, who had been strangers, even enemies, only a few weeks before, now broke bread and started making plans for a different type of community. One founded on respect instead of control, preservation instead of exploitation." George toasted William Hayes in his glass, who reminded us that defending what is right is never easy, but always required. The county courthouse was filled with people for the hearing on Golden Meadows land grant renewal. 3 months had elapsed since the barn fire, months filled with investigations, depositions, and accusations of corruption going into the upper echelons of county government. Mayor Bennett had resigned in the face of charges of bribery and tampering with the evidence. Gregory Phillips had taken over a plea bargain to testify against Elizabeth Montgomery in return for reduced charges. Elizabeth herself sat at the defendant's table, her designer duds replaced with muted business clothing, her imperious demeanor lessened but not completely erased. The land grant hearing would settle the destiny of the whole Golden Meadows development, whether it would go on under new management with altered conditions or whether more radical action would be needed to respond to the environmental degradation. As representative of the land management divisions, I spoke on behalf of our report and recommendations. The documented violations are significant but not irrevocable. I detailed with appropriate remedy, recovery of wetlands, demolition of unauthorized structures, and institution of water quality protections. Golden Meadows can be placed into compliance. Commissioner Wright, now interim mayor in lieu of Bennett's resignation, led the inquiry. Mr. Hayes, in light of the documented history of violations, what oversight do you recommend to avoid future noncompliance? I'd thought a great deal about this. I recommend the formation of a committee on environmental compliance with members from the county departments, environmental committee members and community members, quarterly inspections, public disclosure of results, and significant financial sanctions for future noncompliance. Judge Graham, on behalf of the new Homeowners Association, supported the proposal. The residents of Golden Meadows applaud these steps. We're already implementing voluntary remediation efforts and created our own environmental stewardship program. Elizabeth Montgomery offered a chance to speak and tried one final defense. These alleged violations were routine industry practices. Each development in the county has the same issues if held to this level of scrutiny. Commissioner Wright's response was firm but measured. Then perhaps every development should be examined this closely. Environmental protections aren't requests, Ms. Montgomery, they're legal requirements. The vote of the commission was unanimous. Golden Meadows land grant would be reinstated, but under strict new conditions, significant remediation requirements, and strict oversight. Additionally, all improperly annexed properties, including my grandfather's ranch, were formally withdrawn from HOA jurisdiction. The lines of boundaries were restored to their original legal designations. As an extra precaution, my property was given historic designation, shielding it from future pressures for development. Outside the courthouse, media waited for statements. I held back my brief that emphasized looking forward, not backward, and not lamenting past injustices. Today's ruling confirms that environmental protections count, that property rights count, and that no one, whether they are rich or well-connected, is above the law. When questioned regarding Elizabeth Montgomery, who could have gone to jail for her involvement in the barn fire and subsequent cover-up, I simply stated, the legal system will decide what is appropriate consequences. My issue is restoring what was lost and making sure something like this does not happen to any other property owners. The criminal trial progressed more slowly than the civil one. Elizabeth was ultimately found guilty of criminal negligence, fraud, and conspiracy and sentenced to a 3-year term with 2 years suspended. Gregory Phillips was given probation in return for his testimony and cooperation. The developers Hudson and Brooks came to me with a new proposal, not for tennis courts or a rec center, but for a conservation easement and education center with an emphasis on sustainable land management. We've rethought our development strategy in this area. Their representative said, your grandfather's vision of balanced growth actually fits into what is happening in the emerging markets toward being more environmentally responsible. It was a surprising but welcome shift. Although I stayed guarded, the collaboration provided a means to make something good out of the contention. An example project demonstrating how conservation and development could coexist. That summer, a year after inheriting my granddad's land, I found myself observing as volunteers labored to construct the frame of a new barn. Built upon the foundation of the original, but with new sustainable materials, it symbolized continuity and rebirth. George and Linda Wilson attended, with Judge Graham, Abigail Taylor, and several dozen members of the community, some from Golden Meadows, others from nearby property. Director Howard had signed off on my proposal for a new role in the Land Management Department, Environmental Compliance Director, permitting me to apply the lessons of the Golden Meadows Case Company, wide the insurance payout of the barn fire, coupled with a civil judgment against the previous HOA leadership, donated money to create a legal assistance fund for homeowners engaged in similar wars with predatory association. While the volunteers were laboring, Councilman Foster came by with news. The Haze Protection Act was passed unanimously this morning. He stated proudly, the legislation honored by the name of my grandfather but inspired by my struggle enhanced homeowner protections against HOA abuse, created environmental accountability for progress, and established an open process for land grant review. It was a befitting legacy for a man who had devoted his life to guarding his little piece of Colorado. As the day wore on and the volunteers left, I saw myself standing alone by the half-finished barn. Kneeling in the loose soil beside it, I gently planted a sapling and apple tree derived from cuttings of my grandfather's original orchard. As I filled the soil around its delicate roots, I discovered something half-buried. A rusty metal box. Inside was a well-preserved family photo from the 1920s. My great-grandfather proudly standing in front of the original barn on its opening day, his wife and children huddled around him, faces aglow with pride. Somehow it had survived the fire sheltered in its metal casing. I stood slowly, the photograph in one hand, the other on the coarse wood of the new barn. This land was always worth fighting for, I said gently to the mountains, the dying sun, the legacy of generations who had tilled this land, and now it always will be. In the distance, the lights of Golden Meadows started to sparkle when evening came, but now they didn't feel like an encroaching horde, and more like far-off stars, part of a greater landscape where room could be made for farms and developments for history and progress for individual rights and community duty. The fight had hurt. The loss is tangible, but standing there in the fading light of the gathering dusk, I sense my grandfather's presence and his approval. Sometimes the person who is quietest in the room actually has all the cards. Sometimes it only takes one individual to alter an unfair system by standing their ground and having the know-how to know which ground to stand upon. Another crazy story brought to you by HOA Vibes. If your jaw's on the floor, you're in the right place. Subscribe and stay.